This table talk is made possible by Chronic and Mighty, a newsletter from themighty.com. I'm Kat, and I'm joined by...
I'm Skye.
I'm Shruti.
And I'm Harrison.
And today we are talking about invisible illnesses, invisible disabilities, as well as my very controversial opinion that no such thing exists. So hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start it with just a general question, which is, what do we mean when we say invisible illness?
I think for the most part, when people say invisible illness, what's that statistic? Like over 90% of disabilities are invisible or something like that. I'll probably have to fact check that. I think folks usually mean that there isn't a quote unquote outward manifestation, at least not one that, most able-bodied people would notice. We see the accessible parking space signs are always somebody using a mobility aid. And so I think if you don't have an outward tool or an external device of some kind, then people would regard your illness as quote unquote invisible.
We have a good definition that I pulled from a Mighty contributor piece. Not surprising, we have thousands of stories about this topic, which I think, I think that 90%, whether or not that's the actual statistic, sounds about right. All of my illnesses I have are quote unquote invisible, but the quote I pulled was, having an invisible illness means always looking like your healthy counterparts. It means you never look how you feel. It means you and your illnesses are often doubted. And that last line, I think, is really crucial. This concept of how someone is treated when you, quote unquote, can't see the illness as we believe it to be versus if you can. Obviously, there's a lot of stigma either way. Shruti and Harrison, I would love to hear, do you have any invisible illnesses, any invisible disabilities you want to share?
I do. I live with chronic migraine and complex trauma, with which I have anxiety and depression and maybe a few other physical issues as well. And I like to look at this as, say you have a smartphone and it's glitching and there's no damage on the outside, but it freezes and, the sound doesn't work. But then when you show your smartphone to someone else, they don't see that it's not working. Only you know how it functions. And that's what our illnesses are. And I love that definition that you just shared. It's very real. Just because people can't see, they don't understand. And we often spend so much time as well looking just like them.
What about you, Harrison?
Yeah, I've been dealing also with anxiety and depression for a while now. I'd say the one that I constantly get questioned about is the misophonia. That's something that other people can't, it's not just seeing it, but other people can't hear the things I can hear. Going into just a bar or a restaurant, and if the subwoofer, like the bass on the speaker, is off, is wrong, it enacts a fight or flight response in me, and I have to leave that space. And everybody looks at me strangely, and it's like, well, that's part of it. I can't explain it. I just have a reaction to it, and nobody can see it, nobody can hear it, but it's there.
I'm curious, do you wish people could see it?
No. I suppose.
I think about that often for myself.
Actually, that's a good question. Specifically to that condition, I try to describe it to people in a visual way because often they can't hear what I'm trying to explain. So I try to describe it as visualizing air and then visualizing something like chopping that air or like interfering with that air. And usually they can understand that because it's a pressure thing. So when I try to visualize it that way, people can kind of understand, but I wouldn't want anybody to experience this. It's not enjoyable. It's not something I like. I wear headphones most of my day with white noise or something to block it out. Even right now, I'm on this and I have a slight rain going on in the background just to kind of cancel out anything else I can hear.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. Skye, you got any invisible illnesses or disabilities happen over there?
How much time do we have? We're dealing with OCD, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, chronic migraine, gastroparesis, IBS-C, POTS, bipolar 2. I was recently diagnosed with C-PTSD. It's a lot. I'm working with a lot over here. And I kind of wish I could go around and show people my MRI results or various testing I've had done and be like, look, I'm sick. You can't see it, but here's why I'm exhausted all the time. That question you asked, Kat, about do I wish more people could see it? I don't know, because right now I'm currently in a sling. My left shoulder is immobilized. It has to be for a while. And So people can see that like manifestation of my illness. I appreciate people are more willing to help me out. Like I don't feel awkward if I ask for help or if I'm like, oh, I need to use this accessibility device or tool or whatever in a public place. Like I don't get, dirty looks about it. But when people see like a sling or a brace or whatever thing I'm rocking that day for that injury, they assume I'm dealing with an acute illness. And so once like the sling goes away, they're like, oh my God, you're better. That's fantastic. And I'm like, no, I'll never be better.
I think you kind of touched on what I've been thinking about a ton, which is this concept of like, there are slight benefits to having something that's invisible. And I say that because for me, at least, it invites less questions, right? I mean, if you're walking through a grocery store, Skye, and someone sees a sling, they are much more likely to stop you because people are cool and be like, hey, what happened to you? Versus if you're just walking around the grocery store unassisted by any kind of a mobility device, they're not going to come up to you likely, I don't want to say never, and be like, what's she dealing with, right? So in one hand, I kind of like it that people can't see what I'm dealing with because it helps me slightly with being judged and allows me to mask a little bit better. But then on the downside, and the common thread I see between all of us is other people's perception when our illnesses are invisible. The reason why someone may not understand, they may judge us. That to me is like one of the hardest parts. I actually pulled a quote from another Mighty contributor that if you like the first one, Shruti, I think you'll really like this one, which is, invisible illness can be a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it can be nice to keep your health issues private, only sharing them with others when you're comfortable doing so. But on the other hand, many people hold the misconception that you must look sick in order to be sick, which can lead to unfair judgments and false accusations, which I think, for me at least, hits it.
It's so interesting. I think usually, and I agree with what you say when you say there's no such thing as invisible illness. The problem is the signs and symptoms are often written off as personality traits. Either you're being lazy or you're seeking attention or you're complaining or, oh, you look tired or didn't you get enough sleep last night? But all that could be a sign of pain or a sign of something that we're dealing with. Like Harrison mentioned about the misophonia. If I don't want to go out in the sunlight and play as a kid, that's not a sign of me being lazy. It's just that the light hurts me. So it's just people are not used to experiencing this. So they don't really understand that it is a sign. It is a symptom. You just choose to perceive it in a different way.
That's it. That's exactly what I've been like really thinking about, especially for people who you're around a lot, who you've had conversations with about when I do this, it means I'm experiencing this. At that point, if they choose not to see the signs, to me, it's like you're choosing not to recognize my illness. Like you're actually acting like it's not a part of the conversation. I'm curious, like, what are some things you do? I think not going out in the sun to play is a perfect one, right? I have chronic migraine. I absolutely avoid. I'm in my bedroom right now recording this podcast, and I have the light on, and I cannot wait to turn it off. And it's not that I want to go to bed, though that sounds kind of nice, but I don't want light because it hurts my head. Curious what other things you do in your life that are a product of your diagnosis that are not necessarily like you clutching your chest because you're in pain. Like Harrison, your headphones.
Yeah, I'd say the headphones, but also something that I dawned on me when I was listening to Shruti. I remember at a job I used to have, I worked at a gym for a little bit. And it was probably the worst place for me to work because that was before I really realized that I was dealing with chronic fatigue. And I remember I'd have to, if I ever felt sick on the job, I had an assistant manager who would come up to me, and he was a big guy, and he would just look at me and just kind of like judge my face. And if I didn't look sick that day,
Excuse me?
Yeah, I'd judge my face. He would look at me and say, well, you don't look that pale right now. You don't look this. And he would like try to categorically judge me depending on by his standard of what sick looks like. And if I didn't look sick to him, he wouldn't give me any sort of assistance in that. And I think that there is this, before I go to that, I think that kind of put me into the thought process of, well, is this something I actually am dealing with? And there was a period of time where I really just thought I was internally faking it. I started questioning my own sanity. I was like, am I sick? Like, am I really feeling this? Or is something else happening? Like, I don't know. And yeah, I think that's probably one of the worst situations I've been through.
And I think that's the really hard part about living with something you can't see. I had a lot of mobility issues about 20 years ago when I was poisoned by an antibiotic and then my vestibular system went away. And I had to, when I was relearning how to walk and how to write and how to read, I was using a walker at the time because I wasn't stable on my feet. And it was so interesting the way my peers treated me like that, because there was a lot of empathy. There's a lot of compassion. People would help me pick something up if I dropped it. Then as soon as the walker went away and I ran into a vending machine, the comments I get are a little different, right? The comments are, you're not looking where you're going, versus, oh, you are dealing with something. And then I start to say, am I like milking it? Am I not trying hard enough? And the things we tell ourselves because of other people's perceptions are terrible. I'm still working through my internal monologue. Quite frequently, Skye, we talk about this a lot. The things we say to ourselves and how that feels. What about Skye? What are some things? We see a sling right now, so that's a visible thing. But what are some things you do, some behaviors you have that are a sign of your illness, but no one else might know?
Oh gosh, even just what you were saying, I just got pretty emotional. Wow, mark off on your bingo sheet every time I say that during a table talk. Oh, I got pretty emotional. I'm tearing up. Yeah, the amount of times I've been called a klutz or lazy still happens. But I think what people wouldn't notice, how guarded my movements have become because I'm so afraid of getting an injury or dislocating something or fainting that I've started to move more slowly. My movements have become more deliberate. And then on the mental side of things, a lot of things take me a lot longer than other people. So I'm thinking specifically reading, writing, test taking in college especially. I would use up the whole 3-hour exam period and then have to stay for another hour and a half because I just couldn't write as quickly. The brain fog's so real, the fatigue. And yeah, people wouldn't see that. I mean, they wouldn't see like the stress I would have to deal with, or, people don't realize I have to leave overwhelming situations and overstimulating like environments. Otherwise, I will get a migraine and I'm already in fight or flight and I'm afraid I'm going to faint. People don't realize like what I do to combat low blood pressure and low blood volume. And now I'm thinking about it and I'm like, oh wait, there's stuff that I subconsciously do that I never realized I do.
I was just thinking about how I put on compression socks right before we started recording. And those compression socks are a visible representation of my invisible illnesses. So that's kind of what I was thinking of, right? Like if someone saw me put on my compression socks, yeah, they're cute. They actually have sock monkeys on them. They're pretty amazing. Like they're adorbs, but I'm wearing them for a reason, right? And so that's just kind of what was in my mind when I was thinking of this topic. It's kind of an interesting thing. We typically end with tips or actionable items, but this one feels a little bit different. So instead I will ask you, what kind of message, what kind of advice or statement would you impart on someone who is really struggling with the concept that others cannot see what they're going through?
I mean, first and foremost, if you know you're going through something, you're going through it. Like your opinion, how you perceive your situation is all that matters. If somebody invalidates you, that doesn't mean your experience is invalid. Like if you're going through it, you're going through it. There are, as hard as it is to believe and know sometimes, I mean, I go through this periods of this too where I feel alone. There are people out there who get it. I mean, you're listening to 4 of us right now. But yeah, it's hard and it sucks not being believed. And then, like Harrison was saying, when you doubt yourself, that's so difficult. But I promise you, what you're going through is so valid.
What about you, Shruti?
It's easy to believe people around you, especially because they say if 10 people are telling you something, that means it's true. But in our case, it usually makes us doubt ourselves, and that doubt can take more away from you. Like it can stress you out so much that you'll be in more pain. Like Skye said, don't invalidate yourself. Start there. Regardless of what anybody says, even if it is, psychological, whatever it is, your pain is real. Don't invalidate yourself. Go to therapy, have someone to talk to, and that would really help. And know that no matter what you're going through, you're never alone. Also, I would ask this question. Why would you spend your energy on trying to explain it to someone? Is that someone important? Are they going to be in your life long? Are they going to support you? In that case, sure, go ahead and explain it. If not, then don't worry about it. As long as you believe yourself, everything else doesn't matter.
Harrison, that's a tough one to follow, but I know you have something.
I was going to say, yeah, that is a tough one to follow. Both Skye and Shruti made great points. I'd say to kind of cap that off is don't let others define what your health journey is. And I think Shruti and Skye both kind of said the same thing here. And so I'm kind of echoing what they're saying. But yeah, don't let others, because I've seen, my mother has gone through a lot of medical battles throughout her life. But if you look at her, she doesn't appear, she's very much a definition of an invisible illness. She, though, grew up in a time where we didn't have as much of this social connectivity in which you can find other people that are going through this. So she believed everybody else. And she spent most of her life ignoring the things that she probably could have gotten help for just because she thought she was making a bigger deal out of it. So to circle back, don't let anybody define what your health journey is, because that could actually be worse for you in the long run.
I literally have nothing to add, so I'm just going to say my colleagues nailed it. It's not surprising 4 people here live with invisible illnesses, so you're definitely not alone in that. If you want more conversations like this, subscribe to Chronic and Mighty by going to bit.ly/spoonyinbox. That's bit.ly/SPOONIEINBOX. We'll see you in your inbox. Bye!
Bye-bye.
We've got you back.
Have a good one.